state memorial service is being held for late former President FW de Klerk. He died last month at his home in Cape Town after a long battle with cancer. The 85-year-old was buried privately in Durbanville. Let's touch on the former president's legacy with Gabriel Crouse from the South African Institute for Race Relations. Mr. Crouse, thank you very much for your time. I believe you have described the former president as a courageous political leader. Explain to us why you believe this is so.
Well, thank you so much for having me. FW de Klerk took over the Nationalist Party, a white supremacist organization, in 1989, at a time when it was split between the so-called verligtes, the enlightened, those who could see that judging people by race is no good, and the verkramptes, those who thought that the solution to apartheid's problems was more apartheid. He made a decisive call on what to do about that. He unbanned the ANC, the SACP, and various parties. He released political prisoners from Robben Island, and on February 2nd, 1990, set this country irrevocably on the path towards all-race constitutional democracy. That was not easy. There were many opponents and very critics, and it took a lot of courage for him to do that.
No doubt he contributed, but as Nelson Mandela said on an international stage and an international TV channel, apartheid atrocities were not supposed to happen at all. And this is a man that, for instance, said not so long ago that apartheid was not a crime against humanity. So he still believed, until his death at least, until we saw this video after his death, that apartheid was actually fine.
No, I don't think that's correct. So FW de Klerk described apartheid morally as evil since 1991 and repeatedly apologized for the evils committed under apartheid through the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s. The crime against humanity thing is sort of like a technical, linguistic
How so? Please explain it to us.
Sure. So the Soviet bloc, going back into the 1960s, qualified apartheid as a crime against humanity at the United Nations. And at the same time, they qualified the ANC as the sole authentic representative of black South Africans. Now, personally, I think it's true to describe apartheid as a crime against humanity, but it was always wrong to say that the ANC was the sole authentic representative of black South Africans. There were various other serious political parties with black interests at heart, starting with the IFP. Because of that history, because of the sense that the Nats had, the Nationalist Party people had, that the crime against humanity qualification or term was coming from an aspect of the United Nations that was generally antithetical to some of the good sides of free markets that were being explored in America and the UK and so on. They always had a problem with that phrase, but that's just terminology. At the deep level, de Klerk knew that apartheid was evil. He was a deeply Christian man. He knew on Christian morals that it was evil, and made the changes that he did accordingly.
All right, let me move from that and speak to you about the families, for instance, the Craddock Four, those that they left behind. The fact that it was revealed that FW de Klerk was in fact part of the meetings that were discussing the assassination of, men who were fathers and husbands. Now, those families still feel that the former president didn't do much, because even though he apologized publicly, etc., he didn't do a lot to give them closure and recourse. He didn't tell them the truth. He didn't come out with it. All he said was he's sorry. What do you say to that? They needed somebody who would say, this is what happened, this is what I did, and this is what I'm sorry for.
So the evidence in the Craddock case is contested, but if you look back to
other families who died during the time that, or who were killed, people who were killed, and families who still don't know where their loved ones are till today, because of a government that de Klerk was president to.
Yeah, no, I mean, there were clearly atrocities. And one of the interesting things about the transition period is that de Klerk could see, not only in a moral sense, but also in a political sense, how costly it was every time such atrocities were committed because they alienated South Africa's former allies, particularly in the UK and the US, and gave more political capital to the ANC, which he was negotiating against. So he instituted several independent commissions, most famously the Goldstone Commission, which found that many of the ANC's claims were not true. It also found Eugene de Klerk, Vlakplaas, many of these commissions found that there were atrocities being committed by government agents. And if you go back and check the record, there was some level of accountability. FW de Klerk removed some of the state security agents and heads who were implicated in those reports. I'm not saying that enough was done, but there certainly was more being done than I think is currently acknowledged. And the upshot in terms of giving families closure is that there absolutely should be investigations, should have been thorough investigations through the 90s and the 2000s.
That de Klerk could have commissioned.
Well, no, in the 90s and 2000s, he was no longer in power.
But he could have been assistance. He could have been of assistance. Do you agree?
In terms of giving testimony, it's not clear to me one way or another whether de Klerk had more information to give.
Okay.
What is clear is that not enough information was gathered. And so, I just think we have to be quite serious about the fact that the ANC has done a very poor job of thoroughly investigating in a dispassionate and justice-bound fashion the crimes against humanity that were committed during the transition. And I suspect that part of the reason for that is that the ANC itself knows that many of its members were implicated in killing people. In the People's War, 25,000 estimated people died. Dr. Anthea Jeffrey, a colleague of mine at the Institute of Race Relations, has recorded this very thoroughly. And at least 10,000 of those people were killed by ANC members.
Gabriel.
So both the Nats and the ANC should look harder into their past.
All right. Thank you so much for your time here on ENCA. Of course, there are divided opinions about the former President FW de Klerk, and that was Gabriel Crouse from the South African Institute for Race Relations. A lot of people actually would also argue that the ANC also has some questions to answer to, as you heard from Lukhanyo Kalata. He also believes that is true.